Have you ever had that sinking feeling where you can tell right from the beginning of a gig that you're just not playing at your best? Well, it doesn't have to be that way. In this video, I'll show you why a bad start isn't really such a big deal, and you'll discover just how you can go about turning things around. Now, there's two key things here. The first is that a bad start doesn't necessarily mean that things can't get better, and we'll talk about why that is and how you can get to that better place. But just as important is that you really mustn't let a bad start put you off to the extent where you almost give up and let things actually get worse, because you just don't want to go there. And bear in mind that while I'm talking about all this in the context of performance, what happens on a gig, it applies just as much to practice. So take all these ideas and use them to get more out of your practice sessions as well. And finally, what we're talking about in this video is the general perception that it's just not my day-to-day. We're not really talking about how to address specific mistakes in the moment and what you do to combat that. Now, if you are interested in that, that's something I go into in a lot more detail in my course, Unlock Your Performance. So check that out if you like. I'll put a link to it in the description below. Now, if you start out playing and things just really aren't going well, there is a strong temptation to feel that that's just it, you're stuck with it. You're at that level and it's not going to get better. But that's really not the case. And there's two aspects here. The first is how things can improve. We'll get to that in a second. But actually, the first part of it is that you might not actually be correct that you're not playing really well. When you're performing music, when you're practicing music, it has a really big load on your cognitive power, your brain power. And frankly, you need most of that just to play the music. So you're not able to listen in the way that you would if you're just sitting there and listening to someone else. And this means that your perception of what you're hearing can actually be really quite skewed. So the first thing to be aware of is it may feel bad, but we don't even know that there's a problem there. And one way that you can particularly fall into the trap of thinking you're playing worse than you are is we tend to look out for mistakes. And particularly when your brain doesn't have the bandwidth to think about everything that it's hearing, we set filters on stuff. And if you're looking out for mistakes, that means it's filtering out quite deliberately all the good things that you're doing, just because it's looking for those small amounts of data on what's going wrong. So first up, just be aware, see if you can relax into it, because you might not actually be playing as badly as you think. But even if you are off to a bad start, why is that written in stone that that's the way it's going to continue? You can't possibly get a little bit better or even a lot better as the performance goes on. There's nothing to say this can't happen. But the trick here is to be patient with it, because if you're in that I'm not playing well state, you tend to go either one of two ways, where you can just kind of give up and think, well, that's it, I'm just going to phone in the rest of the performance, and you don't really give yourself the opportunity. The other way can be when you push too hard and you're thinking, I've got to really actively do something in order to get up to that high level. And actually, as I mentioned, the key here is patience. Keep doing the things that you're meant to be doing. Keep doing the right things, but not overdoing it, not pushing. And just have patience and trust that things might just naturally start to get better. And a lot of the time they will. The one thing you have to be aware of, though, is that this isn't guaranteed. There is sadly no magic law that means even if you start out badly, you're guaranteed to get better every time. It's not going to happen 100% of the time, but if you are patient, you're giving yourself that best chance of just settling into it and reaching those higher levels of performance later on. Now, there's another potential bigger danger here, and that is if things don't seem to be going right, there is the temptation to just throw in the towel and let things go. And really, if you're in that situation where you're not happy with how things are going, you've got a choice, a simple choice. There's two things you can do. You can take the fighter's approach where you say, I'm going to tough it out, I'm going to stick with it, I'm going to keep giving it all I can, and regardless of what actually happens, give it my best. Or you can take that victim approach where you're just thinking, it's not my day, there is no point, I might as well mentally switch off and go home. And we will all have a tendency to do one or the other of these things naturally, and this may vary in different situations. You might be a fighter in some and act as a victim in others. It's not that this is just set for everything. But although there is a natural pattern we tend to fall into, it is actually a choice. It is a decision you can make. And I'd be really interested to know, which of these is your natural response in music? Are you a fighter? Are you a victim? Just, let me know in the comments below where you are now. But the important thing is, whichever one of those you feel you identify with, you don't have to be stuck with it if it's a victim response. It can take effort, it can be tough, but you can choose to respond like a fighter, like a warrior. And again, this doesn't guarantee that everything will come out perfect every time, but the only chance you have of that happening is when you stick with it, you give it your best. And think more about this. What is the sense of yourself that you want to have, that you want to look back on? If you're performing for an audience, or even if you're just practicing, aiming to get better and play for an audience in the future or whatever it is, do you want to be there thinking, right, that's it, I don't care about what level of music they get from me, it's not my day, I'm giving up. You're basically giving up on them as well. Whereas if you fight for it, you know that you're giving it your best shot. You're giving them the best chance to hear the best performance you've got in you. And just think, which of those characteristics is the one you want to identify with? Do you want to look back at yourself? Do you want to look at yourself in general and say, yes, I always give it my best. I always try and give the best to my audience. Or do you want to look back at yourself and say, yeah, you know what? Sometimes I just can't be bothered and I don't put in the effort. Because ultimately, it's a choice. And even when it feels tough to do this, even when it feels like nothing is working, thinking about what sort of person you are, what sort of musician you are, I find can really help you get the motivation to tough it out. Now, one other thing that can really help with all of this stuff is deliberately developing a healthy attitude to mistakes. So why not check out my video on that next? I've been Mark Morley-Fletcher. Thanks so much for watching. Please click below to subscribe if you haven't done so already. And while you're down there, why not hit the share button to pass this on to other musicians? Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.